Welcome to the story of a storm. This story is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 8, verses 23 through 27. The lesson focus for grades 3 and 4 is Jesus calms us. This very short story tells us what happens during a storm when the disciples are in a boat with Jesus. It has an important context within the Gospel of Matthew. In chapters 8 and 9 of Matthew, Jesus is walking around Galilee doing amazing things and calling people to follow him. On that day, following Jesus meant getting in the boat. This was probably not a big deal to the disciples. They were locals. They knew the lake. Some of them fished for a living. They probably got in boats most days of their lives. They knew how to handle boats. They could take care of themselves. But that day was different. A storm came up that threatened their lives. They were terrified. Luckily for them, Jesus was in the boat with them. And as it turned out, being in the boat with Jesus made all the difference. Jesus calmed both the storm and their fears. Jesus contrasts fear and faith repeatedly in the Gospel of Matthew. He says, "Do not be afraid," a lot. Repeatedly, Jesus refers to the disciples having little faith, yet he also says not much faith is needed. With faith the size of a grain of mustard seed, they would have power over creation. Later in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus tells them they can move mountains with their faith. This is a story of Jesus' authority and presence. Jesus' words changed the weather. The sea became calm when Jesus told it to. Jesus' words also changed the disciples. They were both amazed and calmed by Jesus' presence and power. Following Jesus makes a difference in life. We are called to follow him just like Jesus' original disciples. As we follow, we learn that we can trust Jesus, that Jesus is always with us, and that his presence in our life can be calming. Day-to-day life can sometimes be overwhelming and even frightening. When we're afraid, Jesus is with us. When we're facing the storms of life, we can trust that Jesus calms the storms of life and Jesus calms us. Jesus has the power to calm storms. What a miracle! In the midst of growing up, your 3rd and 4th graders will be comforted to know that Jesus calms us. Be sensitive to any kids in your group who have learned English as their second language. These kids may speak fluently, but struggle with reading the language aloud. Being forced to read a Bible story aloud can be embarrassing and frustrating for them. This is another great reason to select volunteer readers instead of just going around the circle. It may take a little longer, but give kids enough time to practice finding Bible verses and stories on their own. Whenever you read where the Bible passage is found, have kids figure out which testament, then where in the testament, and then practice finding the chapter and verse. Resist the urge to tell them the page number. Kids will be comforted to know that others feel the physical effects of stress, fear, and anxiety just like they do. If there is a therapist or social worker in your congregation, the Fear Here activity might be a great time to invite him or her in to teach some ways that kids can practice calming themselves. Kids will really enjoy racing their ships during the "This Ship's for Sailing" leaflet activity. Consider providing a large tub of water to make this activity even more sensory. Be sure to provide a few towels for easy cleanup in case of a stormy spill. If the water activity gets a little out of control, it would be a good opportunity to practice calming themselves, like Jesus calmed the storm. For the closing prayer, you might find it helpful to make notes as kids offer their prayer petitions about troubled times. If praying freely is difficult for you, Don't worry. You can model for kids that prayer doesn't have to be perfect. Even in their stormiest times, you can help the kids in your class realize that Jesus calms us.